Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. We have a very, very special guest for you. We have Dr. Catherine Merton. And Dr. Merton I've known Kate for a very, very long time. But Kate is, for all practical purposes, simply amazing. And what I like to think of as Mary Poppins, because she's practically perfect in every way. And once you hear her talk, you will realize that makes even more sense when she talks.
This is the Kate Talks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Kate, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. Kate Merton, I am currently the head of commercial development for Navigate, which is a Novartis subsidiary that develops biopharma clinical diagnostic products. In a prior life, I ran a group of innovation labs for a very large pharma company, and I have a background in drug discovery, clinical trials, and marketing and payer interactions.
So you haven't had much experience then. You're kind of new to the industry, aren't you then, Kate?
Pretty much, yeah. I haven't done very much, no.
So we're going to talk about pharmacogenomics. This is sort of your bread and butter. This is how you see the world changing. And we're going to start by discussing the first topic, which is financing. And who should pay for pharmacogenomics? Is this something that patients should be paying for? Is there someone else who should be paying for it? Should insurance companies be doing it? Should pharma companies be doing it? What do you think, Kate?
Number one, I think it depends upon the country you live in. As you can hear from my accent, I grew up in a socialized medicine country. So over there, I'm sure patients do not pay for it. But if we're talking about here in the US, I think it's a very interesting question because you need to think about who's going to benefit from it the most. Now, number one, it's going to be the patient. But then again, the patient either through their employer or personally pays an insurance premium. And from my perspective, payers who are then able to get a patient on the most appropriate treatment quicker and overall decrease the cost of covering that patient, I believe they are probably the ones that are going to see the most monetary benefit, and therefore they probably will be the ones to initially cover this cost, unless of course you have your coverage provided by the government, and that's a whole other group of people.
But before we continue on to that other question, let's sort of discuss and delve into what you're saying with, as you said, socialized medicine. Here's my question: if you live in the UK, the big question that comes up is that medicine's covered. If I go to a 23andMe or the equivalent in the UK and I ask for my spit to be tested because I want to know what my ethnicity or what my genetic origin is, for lack of a better term, I would imagine that the government's not going to pay for that. If the government doesn't pay for it, I would still expect that I'm still going to get potentially interesting results. Do you think that if I as a person get my information collected, the government should have access to those results to evaluate and sort of drop their own costs?
I think that, living in reality, there are a number of people, obviously, in the UK that are going to go and get their test results. A number of them are actually going to have private healthcare coverage, and then I would imagine would go and share that with their physician, private or otherwise. I think it's up to the patient to make the decision if they want to share the information. If a patient has gone to the effort of getting that test done, they're in it for a reason, probably because they want the best care, and therefore they're going to make the logical decision of sharing it with their provider. Now, people are going to end up doing the pharmacoeconomic analyses and working out that long term, this is a really good proposition. So you're going to take it from the early adopters who pay for it themselves to technology that the government gradually cover. And this isn't it's not significantly different from other technologies that you see adopted. Usually there's first adopters that pay for it themselves. En masse, you see the population do it, and you see the economic benefits, and then the government take over.
So if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that we're still in the early stages. We don't quite know where this will go. Eventually, the government may take over, but for right now, it's more likely that it's going to be patients. Is that a fair reading on what you just said?
I would say it's a fair reading that you're going to see the patient initially pay for that test to be done. So you're going to, unless the economic analysis has already been done. You're going to find early adopters that are curious and they want to know. Perhaps they have a personal reason for wanting to get it done. Maybe they've had a parent die of a certain disease and they want to be prepared. You know,
Right.
often there's an emotional drive for people to be the early adopters of things. And I think you're going to see that first. You know, socialized medicine countries often also benefit from being able to track their data in a different way versus a system such as the various systems that we have here in the US. So it may even be easier and quicker for them to adopt it because they're going to be able to do those analyses quicker. They're going to have more end-to-end data to look at and see the cost-benefit analysis.
So what I hear you telling me is that internationally they will just have more data to work with. So let's take that back to the US. Do you, and again, I'm pulling from your many experiences across many areas of interest. Do you think that this data paucity, if you will, this lack of data, is affecting pharmacogenomic development in the U.S.?
Okay, that's a tricky question. I would say in general, the lack of complete data sets available to patients and providers and even payers here in the US is suboptimal. Let's put it that way. It isn't an accident that certain studies are conducted in Scandinavian countries or Israel where they are able to, they either already have got, like in Finland, the complete end-to-end data set, or in Israel, they're really capable of making it as complete as it can possibly be. That's no accident. So I would say in the US, it might not be hampered, but you're going to have to perhaps be a little bit more imaginative and driven to make sure you see the speed of the uptake to be the same.
So we're going to talk about data privacy and data collection in the future, but for now, let's go back to the question we started with, which was financing. And you sort of suggested, and I'm going back a little bit, and a full 4 to 5 minutes ago, so you'll excuse my lack of memory here, but I think you said that the payers would end up paying for it. At least that makes the most sense for now. Is that correct?
I would say if you look at who is the person who is on the hook to take care of that patient as a whole, they're probably going to be on the hook. Now, it could be Medicare, that could be a payer, it could be a large employer that actually funds their own insurance. I think there's various groups that are going to want to cover that first. There's specific groups within the US who happen to be sort of a combined group who have usually medical groups where they're the payer themselves, they have the patients that are their employees, and then they also own the hospitals and they fund the physicians. That's kind of like a closed group that I think could seriously benefit from doing this first.
See, I'm going to challenge you on that, Kate, because I know you're obviously an expert. We never disagree. But here's a really simple thing. To me, I think you're right that payers might be the first wave, but I wonder if the second wave, if you will, is going to be pharmaceutical companies. And they're going, you know what, I need to differentiate my drug. And pharmacogenomics might be the way to get there. And that might, I wonder from your perspective, from your experiences, do you think that's the second wave, or do you think that's going to precede the payer wave, if you will?
I think that you already see that for certain products that have been approved by FDA and are currently on the market, that it states within their label that a test has to be done, that a patient has a certain kind of, genetic background in order to be appropriate to receive this drug. So I think pharma broadly are already aware and they are kind of like on top of this in various ways, either currently in the commercial landscape or in development. I think what you have to look at is, pharma companies generally like to make money. Right. They just happen to do it in science. They're not scientists that like to make money. And they currently work in a business model where they are often reimbursed for various other things, not just having the right diagnostic test. So I think you'll see some, if it benefits them, will jump into this. And then others will perhaps like to stay with the older model where doing pharmacogenetic testing might actually be seen to limit their market. It's going to depend upon the product. It's going to depend upon the company and their business model.
Great. I'm going to hold you to this, and we're going to discuss more of this in the next podcast. Stay tuned, guys. This was amazing. Kate, thank you again for joining us. Any last words before we finish this podcast?
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory Guy, Irregular Podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.